So in addition to Europe's Proba 3 mission, wherein there will be the creation of an artificial eclipse, there's supposed to be a natural or organic eclipse occurring on April the 8th of 2024. We're going to talk about the symbolism related to that particular eclipse. Many people are very excited about this eclipse, and part of that excitement revolves around the symbolism that is part of that particular eclipse process. And if you would like more general information related to the eclipse, this is where you can find the information. Now, the eclipse that is scheduled to take place in April is garnering quite a bit of attention. Not only will schools be closed in some instances, but businesses will be closed. There is a lot of concern about grid dynamics, and also there's an expectation that the National Guard will be deployed for this particular eclipse in certain areas. So let's get on to the symbolism related to this April eclipse. Now, the eclipse has been coined solar eclipse magic, and so people are saying that there are dynamics related to this particular eclipse that are magical. And one magical aspect, if you will, of this particular eclipse is that you will be able to see these flaring rings of fire. And we're going to talk about what those flaring rings of fire are all about. Now, there is quite a bit of symbolism attached to this particular eclipse dynamic. There are three things that initially stand out related to this particular eclipse, and so there are some correlations going on here. First of all, the eclipse, this total solar eclipse dynamic, is related to the corona. And so what people are excited about is the ability to see the corona. But of course, the word or the construct corona has had another meaning over the past few years. But anyway, the focus is on this corona, and we're going to talk about that. And then this entity mythologically that is attached to the eclipse is also attached to corona. And then third, there is this symbolism attached to this eclipse because it is supposed to be completing this X configuration. And interestingly, the construct of corona, the construct of eclipse, and the construct of X all converge on one entity. And it should be no surprise that the entity of convergence is Seth or Set. Not only is Seth the deity for foreign lands, but Seth is the deity, the god of the eclipse. Seth is the deity of the earthquake. And so Seth has historically been thought of as a very frightening deity. And so in addition to Set being associated with the color red, we also note that Seth or Set is considered the god of overseas trade. So Seth was really a commerce deity. And so that's all tied into that connection with foreign lands. Specifically, Set was a deity associated with the trade of oils, wood, and metal. And so there was also a focus on not only the desert routes, but over sea. And so this was a deity, or this is a deity that's associated with trade and transport and travel across the water and across the desert specifically. And this is what gave him lordship over what was considered Western Asia. And as you may recall, Seth or Set is the storm deity. This is the deity of tumult. This is the deity of confusion and chaos and turmoil. And so this is the deity that is associated with strange climate events such as eclipses and earthquakes. Now, clearly, we've been focused on this construct of corona now for a few years, and this focus continues with this particular eclipse because the corona is the thing that people are seeking to see at that moment of totality. And so when that X occurs, and we're going to look at that, that's when people should be able to see this corona. And so that's what people will be looking for, is that sort of ring that you will see when the moon or whatever it is that's going to be covering the sun, when it covers the sun, that's what you're going to be able to see, that fiery ring. And so that eclipse should manifest what's known as a sort of pearly glow that's around the eclipsed sun during that path of totality. So when totality occurs, meaning the sun is completely covered by the moon, you should be able to see the corona. When the 2017 eclipse path meets with the 2024 eclipse path, there will be the creation of what looks like an X. If you're looking at a map and looking at the paths, you will see what constitutes an X. What's interesting about this is the X is also a symbol that is known as a stigma. And so that X marks the spot that we've been talking about. And so that's what is supposed to be manifested when this particular eclipse occurs, and it intersects with the point of totality from the prior eclipse in 2017. And here you can see another depiction showing exactly where the paths will meet and when that X will start the formation. Now, many people have many theories about this particular X and what it means symbolically, what it means spiritually. But one thing is clear is that that X is the symbol for what is known as stigma. So it's a form of a stigmata. And when we look at Strong's and we see this stigmata, this X, this cross that is being created by this eclipse, what this is supposed to represent in the Greek, in Strong's, in Scripture, is something that is unspeakable in terms of the pain, humiliation, and suffering that comes with it. And so the stigma, the cross, is significant in terms of spiritual theories. Now, the number 666 is represented by a symbol that is known as the stigma. Stigma is also represented by that X, if you recall from a long time ago when we discussed that. And so stigma, stigma, stigma is another representation of 6, 6, and 6. Now, you are encouraged to do additional research on this on your own, but for now, we're just covering the basics. And so, stigma is found at 4742, and this is in Greek Strongs. Now, as a reminder, all of these things that we've just touched on converge on Seth or Set. Set is the deity associated with eclipses. Seth is the deity associated with the corona. Seth is the deity whose symbol is the X. That stigma is the X. 6 is his number, and all of these represent the same thing, and so they sort of stand in for each other. Now, in addition to the corona, the eclipse, the X, we also have another interesting dynamic that is going on with this particular eclipse during that path of totality. Interestingly, the path of totality goes through a place known as New Madrid. And so it's in that area of high seismic activity, meaning there's a big fault line. in that area. And so, for some interesting reason, part of the path of totality is in the path of where this major earthquake fault line exists. And so, not only do we have this eclipse that is related to the idea of corona, we have the eclipse, of course, we have this X, and now we also have this X being in the area wherein this high seismic activity takes place, and it's called the New Madrid seismic zone. And that seismic zone is near areas such as Memphis, Tennessee, St. Louis, Missouri, Little Rock, Arkansas. And so it is in that central area of the United States. And so it indicates here that with respect to the totality in the New Madrid area, and that's also like Madrid in Spain, but it's pronounced New Madrid here. And so it indicates here that this is going to begin at 12:40 p.m. on the 8th of April, and that the maximum time is going to be 1:59 p.m. And so everything is supposed to end at 3:16 p.m. The duration 2 hours and 36 minutes. The totality 2 minutes and 14 seconds. And here you can see all of these time stamps for how the moon is supposed to be moving during this particular time, when it will reach maximum eclipse, and then when the partial eclipse will end. And of course, all of this is going back to some of the dynamics that we've talked about related to the overshadowing. And so that's what an eclipse is. Essentially, it is the overshadowing. And so what we see is that all of these dynamics converge on Set, or they are representatives of Set, or they are symbolic of Set, signifiers of Set. We have the corona, which comes about by the moon covering the sun. And in many instances, Set or Seth is thought of as trying to cover or eclipse that which is the sun, whether we are talking about Horus, or whether we are talking about Osiris, or whether we're talking about the sun itself. And then, of course, a part of Seth's identity is wrapped up in that whole solar disk dynamic. And so we also have the construct just in and of itself of eclipse, the word eclipse, also being related to Seth. He is the god of the eclipse. He is also represented by the X, or that stigmata, and that stigma is what is supposed to be crossing the Americas, or crossing America, crossing North America. During the April eclipse. And so all of this is all about Seth, including the path of totality being on that earthquake fault of New Madrid. And so everything about this is converging on Seth or Set. And even though there is just a general interest in eclipses, there is also a sort of paying homage to Seth or Set with all of these eclipse dynamics. And it's also interesting that there is the creation of the artificial eclipse that is associated with this whole dynamic. And so there's just a lot of interest in all of this, the creation of the X, the creation of an eclipse, and the manifestation of corona.